where today he's hosting the young people in Johannesburg as part of the Youth Month. The event will culminate in the pre-celebration of the Thabo Mbeki's birthday. Let's cross live there.
There was a guy that released an article in the Daily Maverick speaking about what has happened to those students. Particularly, I think he was specifically talking to DUT and Durban as a whole, and how people are still stuck in Westville. But I think the issue around representation, and I think what we need to do from a media point of view as the big institutions, is not only to remind people that the struggle continues, but also to remind people of the major issues that were forgotten about in this body of work. I think
I have to stop you there, I'm afraid. So we're going to proceed this session because we have another book that we are launching and our next speakers are in fact ready. So I know there are many other hands, but have an opportunity when you have reflections to engage further. Please, thank you very much and help us thank both Kanya Bonani and if anything, it shows that it's a book you certainly must get back in all the volumes if you can, because of the debate that this conversation has managed to spark. May I now ask Professors Adebayo and Professor Pityana to please join me on stage. We're now having a conversation now about the second book that we're launching today, and this is Building Blocks Towards an African Century. These are essays in honor of former President Mbeki, and it was edited and the intro been done by Professor Barney. So you will kick us off on this microphone.
Sorry, SABC.
Sit down for us, please, and then.
I don't want to talk sitting down.
Okay. Can we get a stand, please? Can we get another stand?
I fear that if I sit down, I'll be revealing my age. Program Director, thank you very much. I want to start off by kind of making a link between these two sessions. I am going to do that only by quoting this verse from William Wordsworth. Bliss was it that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Or times in which the meager, stale, forbidding ways of custom, law and statute took at once the attraction of a country in romance. When reason seemed the most to assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress to assist the work which then was going forward in her name. The link for me was that idea of moving from custom, law and statute and understanding reason to be the substance of our revolution. The book then that I edited is what I introduce. Building Blocks Towards an African Century. Essays in honor of Thabo Mbeki, former President of the Republic of South Africa. It is a pleasure for me to present this book, hopefully for your enjoyment. The book is 5 years too late, and I join others in wishing President Mbeki a happy 75th birthday, if my arithmetic works, is not letting me down. But it is never too late, I think, to present a worthy product. In 2012, I proposed to the then CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation what I believed would be an appropriate way to honor someone who had served South Africa with distinction for so long, but received very little acknowledgement. I suggested that the 70th anniversary of the birth of President Thabo Mbeki should be celebrated by gathering a few scholars and organizing a colloquium that would celebrate the work of President Mbeki. With the support of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Ambassador Dumisani Khumalo supported the idea enthusiastically and did all that he could to help organize the event. And so I welcome my good friend and comrade, Professor Adekaye Adebajo of the University of Johannesburg Center for Pan-African Critical Thought for kindly agreeing to serve as a respondent to this introduction of the book. Ade is a prolific African scholar. He has published a critical short biography of Mbeki and is constantly engaged in much the same ideas that have preoccupied President Mbeki for so long. Ade, thank you for agreeing to do this at this place, at this time, today. By 2013, the University of South Africa was celebrating the 140th anniversary of its foundation as a university. A partnership with the university meant that the event would be enriched to our mutual benefit. A colloquium under the title Thabo Mbeki at 70 was held at UNISA on the 13th of March 2013. We gathered about 12 scholars from the African continent, some of them based in Europe or America. To enhance dialogue, we also invited some of the colleagues who worked with Mbeki in government and in the ANC, and some academics from UNISA. Besides the opening session, President Mbeki, and the closing session, President Mbeki chose not to be part of the colloquium. Our brief to the scholars who prepared papers was that the colloquium was in celebration of the work of President Mbeki. It was meant to be a scholarly, critical engagement with the work of Mbeki. The plan always was to publish the papers ensuing from the colloquium. We believe that the book should not be reduced to a hagiography of the former president. At the same time, it was meant to celebrate his intellectual contribution to politics and to the African continent. It seemed appropriate to us that a president whose hallmark was his pursuit of reasoned debate, his wrestling with hard questions, and his desire to serve the interests of the people of South Africa and of Africa would best be served by an honest account and engagement with him. The reason we did that was not least because in office he was of necessity subjected at times to sometimes harsh criticism under the glare of spotlight of unrelenting publicity. Such is the nature of democracy. On this occasion, however, we desired that there would, for once, be a critical and balanced outlook, and many of the questions raised in his presidency would receive a dispassionate and thoughtful attention. We are fortunate that some of the most outstanding scholars readily made themselves available to participate and to write a chapter for the book. We are also pleased not only did they contribute, but that they chose topics that were reflected in much of Mbeki's work. In putting the book together afterwards, we honored the work and made very minimal editorial touches to the papers. Likewise, we enjoyed robust debate among the participants to all the papers presented. The published papers, though, do not suggest that the views and ideas contained in them enjoyed the imprimatur of either President Mbeki or the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. We hope, however, that the engagement, especially with Mbeki's colleagues, in the development and application of policy would have informed the scholars and tempered their own understanding of government, presumably because many of them had never served in government before. The publication, therefore, much like the colloquium in which the papers were delivered, is a contribution to debate. Debate is an essential element of the formation of ideas. Matters under debate are under consideration and information. Granted, debates are informed by some knowledge or conviction one has about the subject or a desire to test one's ideas further. The trouble at times is that debates soon become one-sided, partial, and dogmatic. At times, debates are driven by an ideological or political persuasion, or a fixation about an idea or a personality, or by the exercise of power. In a country like South Africa, where freedom of expression and of the media is a prized right, what should have been debate could soon degenerate into name-calling or labeling. In some respects, debate is frustrated by one's excessive desire to please or to appeal to the gallery or to seek public acceptance. Much of our exposure to ideas in South Africa often takes this character. It must be considered, I believe, that during President Mbeki's tenure in the highest office of the land, South Africans were challenged to think, and to think carefully, to deliberate on public issues with some care, to explore ideas beyond that which they found amenable to their own way of thinking, to be suspicious of easy solutions, to agree oftentimes and disagree without being disagreeable. South Africans engaged the President through his speeches in Parliament, through his substantive contributions to policy making in the administration, through his articulation of the challenges that the country faced, and even more so by his regular newsletter, ANC Today. The title of the book should invoke some familiar thoughts and ideas to all who are familiar with President Mbeki's work. It speaks to the fact that any contemporary leader of Africa worth his or her salt should understand that Africa is in the process of construction. In other words, it seeks ultimately to materialize the ideas into something concrete. It was President Mbeki who, I believe, coined the phrase, the African century, as we approached the end of the last and ushered in the new century in the year 2000. This coincided with the adoption of the Constitutive Act of the African Union that saw the transition from the OAU to the AU. That was a time of great promise and hope for Africa never since experienced. This study then is our hope to rekindle these ideas of the great possibility that were held for Africa. A project, I think, very much in the DNA of President Thabo Mbeki. We held the view that this level of intellectual output should not only be celebrated, but engaged with in a systematic a manner as possible, short of engaging in scholarly research. Somehow, scholars gathered together over 3 days addressing various aspects of the Mbeki oeuvre, would open up Mbeki to intellectual scrutiny and to reasoned engagement. In this instance, hindsight was of benefit, because at the height of the controversies and public debates, too much was lost at the heat of the moment. It helped somewhat that the controversies within the African National Congress meant that President Mbeki's term of office was cut short in September 2008. I say this because the haste with which he departed meant that there was no orderly exit for him from office, and much of his contribution, therefore, remained unassessed. This book, therefore, fills a gap, however inadequately. Eminent scholars are often celebrated by their peers and fellows, and by their students and proteges, by the publication of a Festschrift. A Festschrift is not a biography, but a book of essays, not so much on the life of a subject, but on the contribution of the subject to scholarly pursuits or to the body of knowledge to which he or she has delivered eminence. We've attempted something like that with this Mbeki at 70 project. The selected scholars addressed subjects in a range of fields that Mbeki examined in his own ways in his public life. Even then, I can say that there are some missing elements, the most glaring of which is Mbeki and the politics of democracy and constitutionalism. I suspect we didn't find a lawyer eminent enough to speak on that subject. Mbeki no doubt brought dignitas and gravitas and respect and dignity and integrity to the office of president. And he rendered politics a matter of service, especially forever conscious of the needs of the poor. He had the depth of understanding South Africa in its history and in its evolution, to understand that the South African state is a project in formation. And yet, we are nowhere near a perfect state. All that one hopes for is that the state and public representatives would be imbued by the ethics and morality of service. Questions must remain as to whether in South Africa the ideal of constitutionalism would best serve a society eager for change. What cannot be gainsaid, I believe, is that President Mbeki attached signal value to morality in public life and a faithfulness to the prescripts of the Constitution, respect for the rule of law, and becoming the subject of the will of the people. We are pleased that UNISA professors Sabelo Kacheni Ndlovu and Vusi Gumede faithfully report on the deliberations of the colloquium. The value of this is precisely in that not all the papers presented there found their way to final publication. That had to do with the